My name is Daniel Roberts. I'm a 20-year-old man, and I live in a small town in Arizona with my single mother. This story happened a year ago. I worked at a post office, and it was lousy pay. But it was the only job I was able to get at the time. So one night, I was on my way home from work when I realized my gas was running low. So I drove to the nearest gas station and parked my car at the pump. And as soon as I went inside the store to pay for my gas, this woman walked up to me. She looked very young, about 18 years old. By the way she dressed, I could tell she was a goth. Her face is covered in black makeup and had long curly hair. She had on a long gothic coat, skinny jeans, and long black boots. Anyway, she was very nice at first by asking me about myself, like, "What's your name? Where are you from? Where do you work at?" You know, normal questions. After I answered all her questions, I said, "It was very nice to meet you. You have a good night." And I thought that was it, so I paid for my gas and walked outside towards my car. Then the woman began following me to my car, and I turned around and said, "Do you need anything?" And she said no, and came to tell me that I had a nice car. And I said thanks. I tried to be calm, even though at this point, I am freaked out. She walked back inside the store, so I finished pumping my gas into my car and got inside. I was about to drive off, but then I felt a little hungry and decided to grab a snack. Since I thought I was going to be quick, I left my car running with the doors unlocked. I walked inside the store, and while I was looking for a snack, I noticed the woman walked out of the store, and she was walking towards my car. And as soon as she saw me walk outside with her, she ran to my car and got into the front passenger seat of my car and locked the doors. I yelled at her to get the hell out of my car, but she didn't say anything and gave me an evil smile that creeped me out. Then she scooted over to the driver's seat and drove off. I immediately called 911 to report to them that my car was stolen. I told the police that my car has a GPS tracker and I can track down my car. So the police took me to where my car GPS was. We found my car. It was abandoned on the side of the road. It was vandalized and had writings on the seats saying, "I will see you again, and I will kill you." Still to this day, they never found her, and I will always be traumatized for the rest of my life.
This disturbing story happened during the year of 2019. However, if you would like to animate it, you shall. It took place in the time of quarantine, when almost everything was shut down. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, but moved to Virginia because the countryside is more peaceful and doesn't have as many thugs. I worked as a night auditor in a hotel. I won't say the name due to safety reasons. My shifts were usually from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. One night after my shift, I went outside while it was still slightly dark when a tall, stocky man started walking towards me, cradling something in a blanket. I'd been trying to avoid as much human interaction as possible on account of the pandemic, and I am a single mother to 4 very young boys, my youngest being only 6 months old. I was already having a suspension of the man anyway, because who would randomly be standing outside of a hotel with a baby at 6 o'clock in the morning? I tried to hurry to my car before he could get to me, but he said, "Excuse me, ma'am, I need to go to your house to change my baby's diaper. He hasn't been changed since yesterday." Call me mean if you want to, but there was no way I was going to take him to my house. I had sympathy for the baby, but I had my own children's safety to worry about. I said, "Sir, I will unlock the hotel's public bathroom so you can use the diaper changing station in there." "No," he yelled. I then started sprinting to my car. Of course, he chased me. I locked the doors as soon as I got in, but when I started driving, the man jumped out in front of me. He moved once he realized that either he was going to get out of my way or get run over. The next night when I clocked in, I noticed a letter in my cubbyhole that read, "You little bitch, you're lucky that we were outside a building full of people. Just remember that next time, your luck might not be as fortunate." Under my desk was a fake baby doll, wrapped in some color blanket that the man was cradling the night before. The realization showered me in fear. I showed my boss and told him that I didn't want to work a night job anymore, thinking that the man might be stalking me during the nights. A few days later, I found out how wrong I was. I was at home enjoying a peaceful day with my children when I got a creepy letter with no return address that read, "You think you got away? I followed you home from work. I know where you live. I know what you drive. I see you outside as you watch over your little blood bags while they're playing in the yard every evening. I know their names. I know what they look like. I know everywhere they go. Remember, I'm always watching." I kept receiving those sickening, disturbing letters for a long time. The police said that the man left no fingerprints on the letters, so there was nothing much they could do. I didn't let my children go outside much anymore. One morning, it was past midnight when I heard knocking on the door. I looked out the peephole to see the same man from the night at the hotel. I remained silent, thinking maybe he will think I'm not home until he said, "I've been here a lot longer than you think. I know you're right there, and all 4 of your blood bags are in there somewhere. Just wait until I get in there and put my hands on them." I ran upstairs, gathered my children, and locked them in a room with me. I called the police, and that's when I heard glass shattering from downstairs. The man was in the house now. He searched downstairs for what seemed like 20 minutes, then came upstairs, kicking every door and shouting. The shouting grew louder. He was right outside the room we were in. The commotion startled my 6-month-old, so he started whining and moaning. I brought him to my chest, trying to calm him. He was starting to quiet down until the man threw a heavy object at the door and shouted louder. My baby then threw his head back and let out a long and loud cry. The man started kicking the door until I finally heard the police sirens pulling in my driveway. The kicking stopped, and I heard footsteps running down the stairway. The police caught him as soon as he tried to call out the back window. They told me that he had been wanted for assault, harassment, and child abduction. That happened 2 years ago, and my oldest son, who is now 8 years old, has not been the same since. He acts scared to go outside. My other 3 sons are now 6, 4, and 2. However, they do not understand the situation like my oldest does, and I dread having to tell them, due to the trauma that it could bring them.
I love to drive, like hours-long drives to nowhere with no destination in mind. Just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities, and I'd usually take these drives at night since they were less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I've had my license 4 or 5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. That was until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Though now that I've moved out and am in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night that this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a ton of personal issues I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend, couldn't focus on anything else and decided I could take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and to not be gone for too terribly long since it was getting pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive further north down those familiar, dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend, and was just admiring the vast empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight, in seemingly the middle of nowhere. The few houses miles back from the road, lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away and covered in snow. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror or see someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from the headlights, and even then I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, I would head back to the city and home. That roundabout was still maybe 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorist to worry about, right? As I'm rounding around another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazard lights maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark-colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder while the rest was jutted out into the road. Like they had pulled over in a hurry but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. Cell phone reception is spotty at best in this part of the country, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see I hadn't had any service. So, a lone female on the road at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside, with no cell service. No, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds, and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought I needed help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic late at night, and temperatures were well below freezing. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my window a bit, shut off the music, and called out, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything, I would leave, and the moment there was reception, I'd call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I had figured out my next course of action then. So again, I shut out, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a beat, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying, "Yeah." I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response, or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed that there was no damage to the hood anywhere else in the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car, fast. The person did not have any blood on them or appeared injured in any way, wearing a mask. Not like a face mask from the pandemic or a ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you could see in the Purge movies, and they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was. I couldn't get a look, but From its length and shape, my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar or something. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas the moment I noticed those things and drove like a maniac out of there. My heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste and the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow chase or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror, I saw a second man also wearing one of those creepy masks, and no trace of blood on him. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, T, who was a police officer, to tell him what happened and what I should do. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, did they follow me, etc., he told me since it was out of city limits, he couldn't do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic, I managed to tell him what happened not even 10 or so minutes ago. He was, as you can imagine, super freaked out for my safety and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave and that I was okay, but I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement and they assured me that they would go back to the spot I told them that the sedan had been to take a look, and they would try to catch the guys who did it, though with no cameras and no description of the men, I wasn't sure what they'd be able to do. I didn't even get the license plate number, though at the time of my panic, the thought never came to mind until the police were asking if I got it. All they had to go off of was a dark-colored sedan and 2 guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made in fear that it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever it was they started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from the police about whether or not they had any leads, and I'm not sure if they ever will. I'm just thankful I'm still here and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still had so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car, or just a ruse to get more attention? If it was really blood, did they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late-night drives to anywhere, and I hope I never cross paths with those freaks again. This is Blanche Monnier. Born on the 1st of March 1849 into a wealthy French merchant family from the city of Poitiers, Blanche was famed for her striking beauty and delicate manner. Naturally, this attracted a great number of potential suitors, some from prominent positions in high society. But Blanche didn't want to marry for money or prestige, and she especially didn't want to spend the rest of her natural life with some beastly brute she barely knew. No, Blanche was in love. Around the age of 25, she had met a lawyer almost 10 years her senior. Despite his practice being a small and modest affair, Blanche was smitten with him. She didn't care if he didn't have the treasury or titles of some of her other potential husbands. She loved him for the nurturing, caring person he was. Yet in 1874, upon finally expressing her desire to marry the man, Blanche discovered her mother's reaction not to be one of joy, but one of disdain and disgust. No daughter of mine is going to marry some penniless lawyer, Louise Monnier is thought to have said. You'll wed whomsoever your father and I choose. But Blanche was defiant. She told her mother that she was free to marry whoever she pleased. She wasn't an object to be traded to boost the Monniers' esteem, and if her mother insisted on behaving in such a ghastly manner, she'd have no choice but to elope with her law-practicing lover. That night, once all were asleep, Blanche packed a small traveling case with only a handful of her most precious possessions and attempted her escape. Yet when she reached the bottom of the staircase, she heard a shrill voice pierce the darkness behind her. Going somewhere? It was her mother. Louise had been watching and waiting to apprehend her daughter's attempt to fly the nest, and it turned out she had a rather draconian punishment in mind. What happened remained a closely guarded family secret for the next 27 years, and when the public came to learn of Blanche Monnier's fate, they were horrified by what they heard. To most who know her, Blanche was there one day and gone the next. The sprightly young woman seemed to have just dropped off the face of the earth. Blanche's uncle Marcel, when questioned as to what happened to Blanche, would give the same story as her mother. She ran away, said she was going to live with that lawyer of hers. We miss her terribly, and we wish she'd come home. But this lawyer insisted he had not seen his beloved Blanche since the day she'd requested to marry him, and placed the blame for her disappearance squarely at the feet of the Monnier family. Her disappearance caused such a concern that a representative of the Poitiers magistrate visited the home to verify Louise Monnier's story. There, they were shown how her armoire had been emptied of clothing, along with a note purported to be written by Blanche herself that referred to eloping with my beloved. This seemed to have satisfied the authorities, and the blame once again shifted to Blanche's paramour. And although he was never formally charged in connection with her disappearance, he insisted on his innocence until his sudden death in 1885. In the years that followed, Blanche was slowly forgotten about as the world moved on without her. Just another victim of class and circumstance in a culture that sees its daughters as little more than property. Then, on May 23rd of 1901, a high-ranking government official in Paris received a frighteningly intriguing letter from an anonymous author. The envelope that was simply marked with the French words, "For Mr. Attorney General," the letter reads as follows: Dear Sir, it is with the great sorrow that I must inform you of an exceptionally serious occurrence. I speak of a spinster who is locked up in Madame Monnier's house in Poitiers, half-starved and living in a putrid litter for the past 25 years. In a word, in her own filth. She is in dire need of assistance, as I fear her health to be in a grave condition. Please help her. Yours. It reads as if whoever had written the letter was just about to sign their name, then decided against it at the last moment. And maybe this is a sign that Madame Monnier's power and influence reach far beyond the regional government of Poitiers. Regardless of her high status, Madame Louise Monnier soon had her lavish home swarmed by French gendarmerie policemen. She demanded to know why they were there, yet the commanding officer simply ignored her, instructing his men to thoroughly search the cellars and attic spaces of the large house. It was then that Madame Monnier realized why they were there, but there was no mad dash to escape, no attempt to hide her crimes. But then, the damage had been done. While searching the attic of the house, police found a small, locked door that they were unable to gain entry to. They demanded that Madame Monnier produce the key, but she told them that she'd misplaced it sometime prior to their unexpected visit. This was of no import to the gendarmerie, who promptly smashed the door off its hinges before squeezing their way into the tiny room of the other side. The sight that greeted them elicited terrified gasps and exclamations from the policemen. They were gendarmerie, military policemen, trained to combat hordes of rioters on the streets of France. They were hard men, ready for anything, but nothing could have prepared them for what waited for them on the other side of that attic door. And this is what they saw. The woman they found had evidently been imprisoned in what can only be described as harrowing conditions. She was weak, on the verge of death, weighing little more than 55 pounds by the time she was rescued. Confined to a small, filthy mattress, the woman was surrounded by pieces of rotten food, pails of urine and stale water, and piles of her own excrement. The carpet and sheets were positively alive with a nightmarish array of parasitic insects, fat from feeding off of the fragile form of the imprisoned woman. One officer described the stench inside the room as unbreathable, and the officers were forced to return with masks in order to continue their grim work. Yet the most shocking discovery of all came when the emaciated woman was asked her name. Officers were so shocked that they asked her to repeat it. "My name," she said, struggling for breath, "is Blanche Monnier." Blanche wasn't dead. Her mother hadn't had her killed as punishment for her escape attempt. Instead, she had been kept prisoner in a small windowless room for almost 30 years. Blanche was rushed to the hospital following her discovery, and while it's certain that doctors managed to save her life, she was never quite the same. She continued to suffer from a number of mental health problems and struggled to adjust to her newfound freedom. Doctors diagnosed her with a variety of debilitating physical conditions, but it has to be mental scarring which Blanche suffered that proves to be the most debilitating. Psychiatrists declared that Blanche showed signs of anorexia nervosa, schizophrenia, exhibitionism, and coprophilia. Her anorexia is somewhat easily explained by the severe food restrictions placed on her, while the devastating isolation she suffered can explain the schizophrenia. But somehow the exhibitionism hits harder than the former pair, because it shows Blanche was so desocialized and damaged by her isolation that she'd forgotten why she had to wear clothes. Nudity wasn't taboo for her anymore, as if she'd somehow become feral as a result of her suffering. The exhibition of coprophilic symptoms are also enough to make even the toughest of us shudder, as the idea of a person driven so mad by hunger that they'd eat their own excrement is perhaps one of the most horrifying concepts imaginable. These severe mental health conditions led to Blanche being admitted to a psychiatric hospital in the central French city of Blois, where she'd eventually died alone and in obscurity in 1913 at the age of 64. Blanche's mother, on the other hand, managed to escape the swift and unforgiving justice she so richly deserved. Shortly after her arrest, she became terribly ill, and a French judge was forced to allow her to remain on house arrest instead of being interred at the city jail. Just 15 days later, after the news of her crimes had circulated among the Pontier peasantry, an angry mob began to gather outside of the Monnier home. It's then that Madame Monnier, upon learning of the vengeful mob, died suddenly as a result of some previously unknown illness. But between you and me, I think it's all too much of a coincidence that Madame Monnier just so happened to pass away in the face of imminent danger, and it's more likely that she took the coward's way out. It was more bad news in the case of her uncle, Marcel Monnier, who, despite being initially convicted of kidnapping and false imprisonment, was later acquitted on appeal. Bizarrely, a judge suddenly found Marcel to be mentally incapacitated, and that a duty to rescue was not a statute in the French Penal Code. Therefore, Marcel lacked sufficient grounds to be convicted and was set free. As horrifying though as Blanche's story was, it was almost lost to history for a time before 1930, when French author André Gide published a novel based on the incident. Interest in the case was reignited, and the French people were once again horrified by the story of a mother who was soulless enough to inflict unimaginable cruelty upon her own flesh and blood. Louise Monnier had intended to lock her daughter away from the world until people forgot she even existed. But history has a way of bringing to light what is done in the dark. So now all should know of Blanche Monnier, or as she is known by the French in the early 20th century, La Séquestrée des Pontiers, the confined woman of Pontier. Take a look at this picture. What is it you see? Is it a doodle, something someone scribbled absent-mindedly one day whilst talking on the phone. To the untrained eye, what's scribbled on this piece of paper might well appear to be gibberish, but to the improbable few of us that recognized old German cursive handwriting, they might well be able to make out the two words that constitute the entirety of that wall of text: Herzenschatzi and Komm. As it turns out, what you're looking at was intended to be a letter written by a woman named Emma Hawk and addressed to her absent husband. Born in Ellwangen in Germany in August of 1878, Emma was admitted to the psychiatric hospital at the University of Heidelberg after being diagnosed with dementia praecox at the age of just 30 years old. While a patient at the secure facility, Emma wrote a series of highly disturbing and upsetting letters to her husband, often consisting of just a few words repeated over and over again. In the letter you're looking at, she has written the words Herzenschatzi komm, meaning, darling, please come, and then komm, 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 repeated over and over. It's thought that these phrases have been repeated almost 1,000 times on the small piece of paper, and that Emma's husband was extremely upset upon reading the letter, as it was clear that her condition hadn't improved in the least bit since her admission. Emma died on April 1st of 1920, and the hospital staff decided to store her many letters in a rather special place indeed. You see, the University of Heidelberg, where Emma received her treatment, has an entire department dedicated to the artwork produced by its psychiatric patients, known as the Prinzhorn Collection. It's here that Emma's letters were filed away and forgotten about for 80 years, when the Prinzhorn Collection put on an outsider art exhibit in Manhattan, New York City. Once a source of horror and heartbreak for those that knew her, this new generation of artists were fascinated by such candid representations of mental illness. They became the subject of a number of documentary films and were even adapted into a theater play around 2019. Such creative types have managed to put all kinds of spin and interpretation onto Emma's letters, claiming the pieces say more about the person viewing them than they do about Emma herself. But anyone who knows the backstory of such a picture knows that all it speaks is the immense loneliness and suffering of a person who didn't understand what was wrong with her. A person whose sole wish was to be reunited with the man she loved, a man who barely even recognized her anymore, neither physically nor mentally. May she rest in peace. On December 10th of 1945, homicide detectives burst into the home of Frances Brown, a murder victim who'd been gruesomely slain in her own Chicago apartment. She was discovered with a knife lodged in her neck and a bullet wound to the head, having been dead for a long time before she was found. Nothing seemed to have been taken from her apartment, but it was evident that Frances's killer had left something behind. A message scrawled on the wall of her apartment in her own lipstick, and this is what it said: "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." In the course of the investigation that followed, police found a bloody fingerprint smudge on the door jamb of the entrance door. They also interviewed a witness who claimed to have heard gunshots at around 4 o'clock in the morning, as well as talking to the building's night clerk, who said a large, nervous man of about 35 to 40 years old got off the elevator and left the building shortly after the shots were fired. This information led them to 17-year-old William Herons. On June 26, 1946, 17-year-old William Herons was arrested for attempted burglary. Although insistent of his innocence, Herons would make 2 full confessions to 3 separate murders, including that of Frances Brown. On September 4th, Herons admitted his guilt on burglary and murder charges, then tried to hang himself in a prison cell. This wildly contradicts Herons' original statements that he was only going to confess to the murders in order to save himself from the electric chair. Why take the years to save your skin, then try to take your own life immediately after pleading guilty? It's entirely possible that Herons simply realized he couldn't do the time and tried to escape an unjust punishment. It's more likely that the despair of knowing he was caught had set in, and with one of his victims being a 6-year-old child, he knew his imprisonment would be rough, to say the least. In light of Heron's repeated claims of his innocence, no true motive has ever been established for the murders. But the photograph we're looking at may well provide a terrifying insight into Heron's mentality at the time of the killings. Maybe some people really are just consumed with the urge to kill, and maybe it's a craving as tangible as regular people's need for love, friendship, fulfillment, and satisfaction. Maybe for people like William Herring's, killing is the only way they can achieve any kind of emotional release. And what's particularly horrifying about his case is that it seems he was completely self-aware of his nightmarish predicament. He wanted to stop killing. He just couldn't control himself. I was almost 30 and female, and I have been told I look 16 to 18 depending on the outfit. I have an anxiety disorder, and additionally, I have issues picking up social cues, so sometimes I misunderstand things, or get paranoid about things that are really innocent, so I've learned to question my thoughts. I've been working in the food service industry for a few years, and in particular about 2 years at the Burger King this happened in. This incident happened about 4 years ago now. I had just started working some late night shifts, and we hired a new manager, Paul. He was a foot or so taller than me, skinny, with dark eyes, and usually wore large glasses. He wasn't physically imposing, but still made me nervous because he was new and male. There are reasons new males put me on edge, but that's for another day. After a few days, I noticed some strange things. Whenever I worked the counter, he would stand so close behind me that I could feel the cloth of his shirt brush my neck because he was looking over my shoulder. Again, I worked here before he did and had for a year, so it bugged me. If I was stuck in the drive-thru area instead, he would stand in such a way that I was blocked in and couldn't get past him, and every time I bent over, if I looked up, I could tell that he was staring right at me. At first I figured I was just imagining it, that he wasn't purposely blocking me in. I had to be just paranoid again, I assumed. After a few more weeks of working there, he started buying pizza for the crew, or drinks, etc. for a nearby business, and he always was the one to go pick it up and bring it in. I wouldn't eat anything unless the rest of the crew did, and I never drank anything I didn't get for myself, nor did I leave anything in the back office just in case, because I just felt something was wrong. I kept telling myself it's overreacting, you're fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling. One night I was told I had to do a late night shift. Just me, Paul, and Jack, someone that has worked there for a long time, and I trust him implicitly. Before the others left, I asked Jack to please keep an eye on Paul because he scared me. That night, Paul asked me to clean the bathrooms, and I had no choice but to agree. To illustrate the layout to the bathrooms of the building, in order to get to the bathrooms from the main office, you go by the kitchen, around the corner, through a door, into an entryway. From there, you open the men's room door, and from there is a back wall stall with a door. That's the stall I was in. So I'm there in the main men's stall, and Jack is in the kitchen as far as I know, with Paul in the office. As my back is turned, I hear the propped open men's room door shut. I turn around, and blocking my exit to the men's stall is Paul. Immediately I panic because that means that's 3 closed doors between me and Jack. Paul holds up a pair of drive-thru headgear and makes a comment like, "So I found these new ones in the office. Want to use them? I probably shouldn't give them to you, but I like you, so I figured why not?" I decline, and honestly I was shaking out of my shoes. Innocent as the dialogue was, he was looking me up and down the whole time, and it just felt creepy. He stood there about a foot away and just stared at me, not saying anything. And after a minute or so, Jack came in and said that there was a phone call and Paul had to come get it. Naturally, I booked it out of the bathroom and stuck myself to Jack, explaining that I was really scared and felt uncomfortable with the way Paul looked at me and the odd way he was behaving. Well, to me it was odd anyway, but again, I felt like I was probably being paranoid. He told me he wouldn't let me out of his sight the rest of the night and that he was sorry that he had been distracted. He didn't like Paul either, and he kept good on his word. A few hours later, Paul says he's grabbing pizza and some soda from the place I mentioned earlier. When he came back, he called me to the back office and offered me a glass of soda, pre-poured. I said no thanks, I'm fine. Thinking to myself to the time that I'm being overly stupidly paranoid, but then again, why did he always bring soda? We had over 100 kinds on the premises. He asked me another 2 to 3 times if I was sure, and I again declined, Jack right beside me. Then Paul asked me if I had a boyfriend. I did, but I lied and said fiancé because I figured it maybe dissuaded any potential flirting. He says, "Fiancé? Aren't you a little young for that?" I don't know why, but I told him my age. He just kind of sat there and looked me up and down, really slow. "Oh, I thought you were 16 or 17. From there, he left me pretty much alone. Believe it or not, 3 days later he was arrested because the place he worked for before, he had inappropriately touched an underage female coworker, threatened them, and told them he was a cop and so on and would arrest them if they told. Eventually he was transferred from there to where I work, and we were never told anything till his arrest. He comes by twice since then, even though he's not allowed on the property because we have minors on site. I'm still freaked out, especially because the last time he came around, he came through the drive-thru where I was standing. So to Paul, I hope I never see you again, and you get exactly what you deserve. For a little backstory, the legal drinking age in my country is 18, so if you want alcohol and didn't have a fake ID or a parent to get it for you, then you had to wait outside of the off license, which is like a liquor store for the Americans, until someone came by who agreed to go in and purchase the alcohol for you. So we waited around, found someone who was willing to go in and buy our alcohol for us, and got him to purchase a few bottles of vodka for me and a few friends, 2 of which I was with. Now, as it was around 6 p.m., we decided it was too much of a risk to decant our vodka into a less suspicious-looking bottle in the middle of the street, as it was very busy, so we did what we would usually do in this situation and found a nearby food place to quickly run in and use the bathroom to decant our alcohol so we could be on our merry way. This time we chose to do this in a nearby Mcdonald's. We'd done it in before, so we knew it was a safe bet. So we go into the McDonald's and head straight for the bathroom, as we'd done a million times before. As we get into the bathroom, me and my other 2 friends, we'll call them Harriet and Kara, all occupy one cubicle to get the job done and get out and back to our drinking ASAP. And as I previously mentioned, we'd done this lots of times before and usually opted to come into this McDonald's as it was usually busy, which meant no one paid attention to 3 teenagers running straight to the toilet without purchasing anything. So anyway, we're all in there doing our thing when I could suddenly hear a lot of shifting and moving above us. I figured it was possibly the air conditioning and opted not to tell my friends as I thought it would freak them out. We get the job done, and as we're about to leave the cubicle, we hear a giggle and a, "Where are you girls off to?" I looked up and see the forehead and eyes of a male who looked to be about 30, just staring out from underneath the tile in the ceiling that he'd slightly lifted. We're all in shock, just staring at this guy who proceeded to giggle down at us and ask our names, where we were going to, and if he could come. We're all in shock because, let's be honest, who really expects there to be some random guy in the ceiling of a McDonald's? Being a teenager who thought I was untouchable, I proceeded to tell the guy that he was a perv and to F right off. The guy seemed to enjoy this and giggled a little more, still shifting around in the ceiling, never taking his eyes off of us. Now, I should probably mention that along with pouring our drinks into other bottles, we pre-rolled a few joints, so we were scared to alert anyone at this point, as we were young and terrified of our parents finding out. The guy still staring at us proceeds to ask questions like, "What age are you guys? Where do you live? Can I have some of your drink and smoke of your weed?" Still all the while twitching and fidgeting overhead. He then started to lift the tile, and as we're all stuck in a cubicle with this guy above us, we knew the only way for him to get down was to come down directly on top of us. So we got out of there at that point pretty quickly. We went outside and discussed what we were going to do, and I decided to go back in and alert someone, as it's a very busy McDonald's and I knew that there would be women and children in and out of the toilet until closing time. I didn't want to risk that creep staying up there just to spy on them, especially since I knew he was there and had witnessed his behavior firsthand. So I go in, tell a member of staff that I'd been in the toilet for a long while talking on a phone call. Terrible lie, but my 15 to 16-year-old brain was too scared to tell the truth in case they alerted the police. And that's when the guy had appeared, and to my shock, they were completely unsurprised. They were just angry more than anything. I've seen a few male members of staff enter the toilet, and I figured they could handle it from there, so I went on my way. We still went into that McDonald's, but never had any encounters with that bathroom fairy. We're not even sure if the guy got caught, as we didn't hear anything about it afterwards. So a few days after my 19th birthday, a few of my buddies and I are rolling around town in one of our cars, passing bottles and generally getting up to no good. We find a spot to park up, have a few smokes and blast some music, hanging out and just messing around until long after the sunset. Eventually, once we get hungry enough, we decided to drive over to Burger King to get a bite to eat. Now, I'm pretty lit by that point, and I've been lying if I said I wasn't generally being a complete jerk here, but here goes. So the Burger King drive-thru is closed for some reason, so we park the car up, get out, and head into the restaurant. And at the head of this huge line was this giant ham beast who was in the middle of waving her arm flab around, making some animated complaint about her order. My drunk buddies and I proceeded to watch this ham beast making an absolute idiot out of herself for like 10 minutes straight, holding up the entire line until eventually she steps to the side to wait for her corrected order or whatever. Either way, the line starts to move again. Everyone is super livid at this hog lady for holding up the line, and I could tell the workers behind the counter were less than pleased with her too. So by the time I get to the front to give my order, I'm feeling all cocky and righteous, and for some reason I had it in my head that if I made the workers laugh by roasting the hog lady, I'd get like a free meal out of it or something. So I say something to the effect of, "May I apologize on behalf of humanity for the irate snuffling of my heavy friend here." No one laughs. They all just look pretty shocked, looking back and forth between the ham beast and myself, waiting for the aftermath. She turns red in the face, and I expect her to explode on me. I'm ready for the black eye or whatever. It was worth it, just to hear my buddies cracking up behind me. But she didn't flip her lid. She didn't say a word. She just sort of stood there, steaming mad until the guy behind the counter appeared with her amended food order. Then she just sits down and starts eating her food. We get our food and sit down on the opposite side of the restaurant, and all the while my buddies are like, "Come on, man, you burned her, jeez, dude." But I'm looking over at her, because the ham beast is on her phone, just talking all quiet, but every so often she shoots us a little bit of a look with this big smug grin on her fat face. I don't know what I was expecting to happen, but why I thought I'd get away with it, I have no idea. Because the moment we walked out of that restaurant, we just hear from behind us, "There he is. That one, right there." I look around, and she's pointing at me, the same smug grin on her face. Then, when I turn back, there's a gun in my face. I honestly can't remember what the dude was screaming at me, only that he was, but I know it was her husband. It's weird the little details you notice when something like that happens to you. I distinctly remember seeing the dude's wedding ring on a finger that was wrapped around the handle of the pistol. I'm not a gun guy, but that thing was an incredibly big pistol, like huge. And all I did was sort of zone out and look down the barrel for a few moments with this guy's screams ringing in my ears. It was only when he pushed it to my forehead that reality came back to me and hit me like a ton of bricks. I just remember shaking so hard that when the guy told me to get down on my knees, I could barely react. He screamed at me to get on my knees because I didn't deserve to die on my feet, And that line stuck with me even to this day. I've never been so scared in my entire life. If you notice, I haven't given my name or where this happened or when it happened. This is to give me enough anonymity to admit that just after I fell to my knees, and I mean fell to my knees, I just straight urinated my pants, which I didn't even know was really a thing. I mean, obviously I've heard about people being so scared they wet themselves, but I didn't think it could actually happen to people. But I suppose since I was full of booze and that large Coke, there was plenty in my bladder to void, and void my bladder I did. Somehow, I had found a way to make a terrible situation even worse. Not only did I think I was about to die in a parking lot, while a whole restaurant full of strangers looked on in horror, I was about to die soaked in my own urine, cowering and shaking, on my knees outside of a freaking Burger King. He starts shouting other stuff at this point too, but I can't quite remember that either. I was just waiting for the moment my light switched off, a feeling like I'd fallen asleep real fast that I'd never, ever wake up from. I remember trying to shout something myself, something about how, will someone please call the cops, or whatever, but fear is a powerful thing. I couldn't speak. I mean, it was like a nightmare come to life. One of those where you try to scream for help, but your voice just sort of dries up in your throat. The next thing I remember are my ears pricking up to the word cops being spoken by some bystander just out of my view. Then I hear the distinct voice of the ham beast repeating the word, only this time, it's not me that sounds scared, it's her. I feel the tip of the pistol leave my head, and by the time I summon the courage to look around again, I see the pair of them, ham beast and gun guy, screeching out of the parking lot in some battered old sedan, followed swiftly by the blaring sirens in the distance. It was only when I was giving my statement to the cops that I noticed my buddies were gone, and not only were they completely out of sight, so was the car. So I had to be driven home to my parents' house in a freaking cop car, which clued them into the fact that I had been drinking, which to them was far more worthy of their attention to the fact I'd almost just been shot in a Burger King parking lot. They tried to ground me for like a month, but they didn't need to enforce it. I was too shaken up to leave the house for the first week entirely. Just be careful who you're talking to or trying to be funny. You never know who's psycho enough to put a gun to your head.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.